This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. New numbers show a strengthening economy, but why does it skip so many American workers? We talk today with two experts about middle-class values and the value of the middle class. Union President David Rolf notes the irony that this is one of the best times to be a consumer and the worst time to be an employee. Economic analyst David Madland shows that trickle-down economics has failed and that ultimately facts will trump special interest and ideology. And Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar talks with Bill Press about her new book. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Union leader David Rolf says even Republicans can be persuaded that America will be better off with a strong middle class. But it's the plutocrats and their hired guns standing in the way. And we say hello to David Rolf, who's the president of the Service Employees International Union 775, also serves as an international vice president of SEIU. And the article, The Fight for $15, The Right Wage for a Working America. David Rolf, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
You have laid out a manifesto, along with a co-author of another article, Nick Hanauer, for protecting this new workforce of freelancers, contractors, temp workers. So they have a half a chance of making ends meet. What are some of the key elements of your proposed shared security system?
Well, we should first understand what some of the problem is we're trying to solve here. Tens of millions of Americans now work in jobs that don't look like full-time, permanent, lifelong jobs anymore. They don't even necessarily look like traditional employment in a temp agency, but rather sort of this emerging gig economy or the on-demand economy where you may never meet your employer. You might get a task off of TaskRabbit or off of Amazon Turk, do it, get paid through PayPal the same day, and never work for that individual or company again. You might be a driver for a ride-sharing platform and get paid by literally 40 people in the course of a day. You might be a more traditional freelancer where you're simply selling your particular set of skills to a wide variety of different clients in the course of a day, a week, or a month. All of these people are essentially excluded from most labor and employment laws. They're considered independent contractors. Now, in some cases, they're misclassified independent contractors, and it's really their employer exploiting them, and that's just a case of violating the law. But in a lot of other cases, they really are independent contractors who don't have a steady, permanent, or ongoing relationship with a single employer. And the question is, how do we get them the benefits of employment? So in the article that Nick and I worked on for Democracy, we really proposed taking some very old concepts and updating them for the 21st century. In America, we have the Social Security system. It is one of the most successful programs in American history, and it had the impact of lifting most senior citizens out of poverty when it was implemented. It happens to be universal, it happens to be portable, and it happens to be prorated. So if you work 1 hour for an employer, they pay into Social Security. If you work 2,000 hours for an employer over the course of a year, they pay into Social Security on a per-hour basis as a percentage of your wage. The same is true with state workers' compensation systems, unemployment insurance. The same is true of Medicare. We simply think that you could update those systems along with employee health insurance, employee retirement accounts, sick days, vacation days, so that all employment-related benefits like Social Security or Medicare are universal, prorated, and portable. And if you did that, it would allow those of us who are customers of something like Uber or TaskRabbit to embed within our payments to our driver or whoever is helping us move out of our apartment sufficient resources that would then be distributed to the appropriate retirement, health care, et cetera, and allow this workforce to do what they do and work how they want to work, but to still receive the benefits of employment.
So is that to say then that social benefits for workers would be divorced from the job itself and provided to everyone no matter where they work?
Right. Any employer or any purchaser of services would need to make a small contribution towards the health, retirement, paid time off of the workers who are working for them. So, for example, if right now I use a ride-sharing service to get from the airport to my hotel while I'm traveling, right now I pay a certain amount of money. About 20% of it probably goes to the distribution platform that I have on my smartphone, and about 80% of it goes to the driver. None of it goes to pay for health care. None of it goes to pay for Social Security. None of it goes to pay for Medicare for later in life. None of it goes into workers' comp insurance or unemployment insurance. None of it provides a pool for sick days and vacation. But with a reasonably small price increase or a decrease in the amount of profit that the platform took, you could actually aggregate and distribute all of those benefits to that driver, who would then not only make the wage that he or she earns for driving, but would also have the security of knowing that if they ever got sick, they'd have a chance to take time off and see a doctor, that if they ever want to retire later in life, that they're going to have retirement accounts, Social Security, and Medicare to help them do that.
We're speaking with David Rolf, president of the SEIU Union 775, also serves as international vice president of SEIU. How much is the current disruption of the traditional workforce due to technology, innovation, globalism?
All of the above. This is one of the best times in history to be a consumer and one of the worst times in American history to be a worker. And while other countries we compete with, are figuring out how to protect their middle class, like Germany's doing, or like the Scandinavian countries are doing, or countries like Brazil and China, who are building vast new middle classes for the first time. In America, we've had a 40-year war on the middle class. We've actually said we're going to implement a whole bunch of government policies that try to block people from getting prosperity, from sharing in prosperity and getting into the middle class. We're going to freeze wages. We're going to shrink wages for the bottom 50% of income earners. We're going to essentially from the 70s through today have a government that facilitates the upwards transfer of wealth and prevents people from joining the middle class, which is why today Canada and Germany have, by percentage, much larger middle classes than America does. And that, to me, frankly, seems un-American.
Mm-hmm. Now, you argue that America has fallen for the right wing's belief that wealth at the top will trickle down and strengthen the middle class. What is the reality?
Well, the good news is we now have a 40-year experiment in what it looks like to transfer all the wealth and all the power upwards. And if there were honest conservatives in the mid-1970s who really believed that that was how to grow an economy and achieve prosperity for everybody, they've now had a chance to prove that theory. And the bad news for all of us is that they were wrong. That we followed the wrong leaders, we followed the wrong ideas, and the whole idea of trickle-down economics has failed the country. It succeeded only in enriching the already rich, and it really damaged the American middle class and made the American dream less attainable for the next generation. Here's the reality. You don't grow the economy by concentrating all the wealth at the top. It's really like saying that fewer transactions will lead to more transactions. It ultimately makes no sense. The way you grow an economy is through inclusive prosperity. And there's now a number of really excellent economic and academic studies on this. I'm not an economist, and I'm not an academic. But what I do know is that it's just common sense. That if a teacher or a librarian or a postal worker or a carpenter can afford to go to the store and buy things, that creates jobs for the people who sell those things, transport those things, and make those things. And that's just basic economics. So we believe that the economy grows from the middle out, that the source of, we have a 70% consumer demand-driven economy. So if we're paying people so little that 70% of our economy is really on the sidelines, and can't stimulate growth in business and growth in employment by consumer spending, then we are hurting our own long-term growth potential.
Now, America, and especially the middle class, prospered, you mentioned prosperity, from 1950 to 1980, give or take. So what changed? How can we restore the American dream?
Yeah. We had a government that was committed to the expansion of the American dream in the middle class. We had a strong labor movement that could bargain wage increases higher than inflation, and new employment benefits that contributed to the lifelong economic security of Americans. And then we started implementing policies from banking deregulation to the deregulation of major industries to, the federal government's imprimatur of approval on union busting that combined to weaken the labor market power of American workers. Some of this was due to globalization. Globalization explains a whole lot about why only 5% of the clothes we wear are made in America. Globalization explains absolutely nothing about why a jet fueler working in an American airport used to make $60,000 a year with benefits in today's dollars and now makes the minimum wage. That really wasn't about globalization. That was a different set of decisions. And, we can talk about a lot of factors, from airline deregulation to Ronald Reagan busting the Air Traffic Controllers Union, to the fact that minimum wage hasn't kept up with inflation. But the real story here is American workers don't have the power they used to have. And if we're going to rebuild a middle class in the 21st century, we have to figure out strategies for rebuilding the labor market power of American workers.
Well, and, along those lines, you raise an interesting paradox in that corporate America demands certainty from government in tax and regulatory policy, but offers no certainty for the workers who provide the profits. So what is the solution?
Well, it's funny. They never wanted certainty when we had high corporate tax rates, high marginal individual tax rates. Then they wanted things to change. Now that they've got record low taxes, record low regulation, one of the lowest percentages of effective corporate tax rates in the world, now they say they want certainty. Meanwhile, the gang on Wall Street and the gang on K Street has created a huge amount of uncertainty for American workers and the middle class, people who want to be in the middle class, people who used to be in the middle class, people who are still hanging on to the middle class, but who used to be able to count on lifelong job security, used to be able to count on a pension, used to be able to count on employer-paid health benefits, used to be able to count on a certain work schedule and a certain amount of hours per week, and used to be able to count on annual pay raises. And all of that is gone. Right? We have seen the withering of the 20th century's employment contract and social contract between employers and workers, between companies and communities. And, part of the point we make in this article is that, if it's reasonable for business to expect certainty, then it's reasonable for Americans of all economic statuses to expect certainty. Knowing that you can take a sick day if you're sick, knowing that you can go to the doctor, knowing that you'll someday be able to retire, gives workers the confidence to also become consumers. And as they become consumers and spend money, they then help create jobs.
And while progressives like us certainly find merit in your proposals, do you think that independents or swing voters can be persuaded?
Oh, I think so. I actually think these are not radical proposals or particularly new ones. I think that even Republicans can be persuaded that America is better off if we have a thriving middle class. Even a majority of Republican voters support higher minimum wages, not quite as high as I would want to take them, probably, but the reality is it's only a handful of, plutocrats and their hired guns in Washington, D.C. that would want to oppose a growing middle class and more economic prosperity for Americans. I think, listen, the idea that America is strong because our citizens are strong, the idea that we're strong because our workers are strong, and the idea that we should all be able to work hard, support our families, and share in the prosperity we help create is not a radical idea. It is an American idea. And for 200 years, this country, which was hardly born into perfection, nevertheless passed along more liberty and more justice to every following generation, always through struggle. Now, for the last 40 years, we've been heading in the wrong direction. Even while it's great to be a consumer, as I mentioned, it's harder and harder to be a worker. It's harder and harder to provide for your family. And we can do better than that because we're still the wealthiest nation on earth. Our workers are more productive than ever. And it's hardly as if the CEOs and the Wall Street guys have been tightening their belts. This is really about a fair shake for everybody.
David Rolf, president of the Service Employees International Union 775, also serves as an international vice president of SEIU. David, we appreciate your fight. We wish you the best of luck, of course, and of course we want to thank you for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks so much, Jim.
All right, and we look forward to having you back again soon. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Economic policy analyst David Madland says trickle-down economics has been proven to be a failure, but it's still accepted by too many policymakers, including some Democrats. We'll hear from him in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
History, as the old adage goes, is written by the winners, even though many winners are losers as human beings. For a clear example of this irony, check out the new national monument to corporate greed created by our Park Service in Chicago. It's on the site of what had been Pullman, a company town created by the feudalistic 19th century profiteer George Pullman. He amassed a fortune as a railcar manufacturer, infamously suppressing the wages of his 5,000 factory workers. Yet, he considered himself a beneficent employer, having built a 600-acre town for the workforce and vaingloriously naming the new home place for himself. It included houses he rented to them, churches, schools, a bank, library, and parks, all owned by his company. Indeed, when officials announced this year that Pullman's town was becoming an honored part of America's park system, officials attested to his generosity by hailing it as a place he created, quote, to provide his employees a good life. Pullman Town's workers, however, were less charmed, for he ruled the burg as autocratically as he did his factories. No saloons or agitators allowed, nor did he allow any public speeches, town meetings, independent newspapers, or even open discussions. Resentful residents created a little ditty that summed up the surreal feel of the place. We are born in a Pullman house, fed from the Pullman shops, taught in the Pullman schools, catechized in the Pullman church, and when we die, we shall go to Pullman hell. In 1894, the workers got Pullman's hell on earth when he drastically cut their wages but refused to lower their rent. He had guaranteed a 6% return to the wealthy investors who financed the town, he explained, and their needs came first. This is Jim Hightower saying, now, 120 years later, we taxpayers are financing a monument to this loser's greed?
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Economic expert and author David Madland says it's a strong middle class that makes democracy work, and even Republicans can be persuaded of that. And we say hello to David Madland, director of the American Worker Project and the managing director of the economic policy team at American Progress. He's also the author of a new book, Hollowed Out, Why the Economy Doesn't Work Without a Strong Middle Class. David Madland, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks very much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you with us. And great topic. Your book, for starters, a scathing indictment of trickle-down economics. So is it your argument that Reaganomics is the chief culprit in the hollowing out of the middle class?
It's a big culprit. So the idea behind Reaganomics was really you help those at the top, and then eventually that'll benefit everyone else. And you help the top by cutting their taxes, reducing their regulations, and by weakening things like the minimum wage and unions that would help ordinary workers. And the effects of that are very clear in that incomes for most people have stagnated while the incomes at the top have grown very, very quickly. You can also really see this when you look at other countries, because some of the other explanations for why we have such high inequality are that, globalization and technology have changed, and those certainly have contributed to it, but not every country has had the record levels of inequality that we've had. Some, in fact, have been able to deliver economic growth for most of their people. So you have, some examples, Canada or Australia, even Sweden. They've been able to have wage growth for most of their citizens for decades, subject to the same economic forces that we've been subject to.
Now, in the post-recession recovery, big economic numbers really do look good. But the reality is, individually, people are hurting. Is there or was there any way to avoid that?
Well, first, I want to say, the high-level numbers like the GDP, they're okay. The economy is growing. It's not growing super fast, but it's growing. The real problem, though, is wages are not rising. We've had basically stagnant or even declining wages through the Great Recession and the recovery. And what little growth there has gone almost exclusively to the very, very top. And so, yes, most people are hurting, but it's what I think is really important to understand. It wasn't just the Great Recession. These are long-standing problems, and the Great Recession really brought them to the forefront. But since basically the 80s, inequality has risen to extreme levels. Income gains have gone almost all to the top. It's not just about the Great Recession. It's a long-running trend.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the Obama administration perhaps made a mistake in not pushing for stronger measures, or should this be handled, at the state level, or is it just up to the private companies to kind of take the lead, as some have, in terms of raising wages and that kind of thing to close the gap a little bit?
Yeah. So as I said, this is a long-running trend, and the administration did several good things to help us get out of the recession, from the stimulus where money was put into things like infrastructure to other things where they've been trying to raise the minimum wage, for example, for government contractors, because that's what they can do because Congress won't let them raise the minimum wage for everyone. So the administration has definitely taken some steps. They could and should have done a little bit more, but the problems that we're talking about are long-standing, and any single president in just their 8 years could not have tackled them all. It's going to take a significant amount of time and a significant policy change, and that's really what I'm arguing in my book, because for decades our policies have been based on this idea of trickle-down, that if you make things better for those at the top, that's going to help everyone else. It's been a failure, and so we need to dramatically change the way we make policy to focus first on the middle class, to first improve their lot, and then that will benefit the rest of the economy.
Obviously, there's going to be pushback on any sort of change that way, as there's been pushback for the last 7 years with this particular administration. But as you point out, it is a longer-term thing. What are some of those things? What's some of the groundwork that could be laid that's possibly bipartisan that would actually achieve some closer to equality in terms of wages and strengthening the middle class?
Well, bipartisan is hard, as you know.
Sure.
But so on the bipartisan, and there are a few things. So our tax code is riddled with all sorts of loopholes that, for the most part, benefit the very wealthy and corporations. And there is some bipartisan willingness to tackle those loopholes. So that's the one of the few places I see for bipartisan agreement. The broader issue of things that need to be done right now, unfortunately, are typically opposed by Republicans. Things, for example, raising the minimum wage. We also really need to boost unionization. That has really been one of the key drivers of the decline of the middle class, has been that workers don't have any sort of power to negotiate with their employers. And so you can see that when you look across the world, countries that have stronger middle classes really have stronger unions, and there's no doubt about that. So that's the kind of thing we need to do.
It's a couple of big hills you just posed for. Republicans are going to fight that to the very end. It seems. We're speaking with David Madland, director of the American Worker Project and managing director of the economic policy team at American Progress. He's the author of a new book, Hollowed Out: Why the Economy Doesn't Work Without a Strong Middle Class. So, David, if you would, can you explain for us non-economists your principle that you need a strong middle class for the entire economy to work? I mean, how do you convince a Republican business owner of that?
Well, I think you make the arguments about what a middle class does for the economy. And one of the first things and the easiest thing to understand is that business people need consumers. In order for businesses to grow and thrive, they need consumers, and the consumers need to have money in their pockets. And with the middle class so weak right now, businesses don't really have enough customers. That's why we've had quite slow growth for a period of time. Also, you think of one of the major contributors to the Great Recession was that consumers went greater and greater into debt to just afford basics. They took on such high levels of debt that our economy became fragile and unstable. And so the weakness of the middle class contributed to the Great Recession, which collapsed profits for lots of companies and put lots under. So that's the kind of thing people need to understand and explain, and I go through that. But there's a lot more that the middle class, a strong and growing middle class does besides consumption. They are also help make our democracy work. So right now, it's unfortunately that the rich have excessive power in our democracy, and so we do the things that benefit them instead of the things that would benefit all of the economy, like investing in infrastructure and investing in education, because the wealthy, they just don't care about those things as much, and they don't want to pay the taxes to provide those kinds of things. But everyone would be better off, and the economy would be growing more if we were able to make those kinds of investments, and our democracy were functioning better. You also have societies where there's a stronger middle class and lower levels of inequality have greater levels of trust between people. You're willing to do business with people. It's easier to do business. And instead, we now have a society characterized by high levels of distrust, and it makes businesses transactions cost a lot more because you, for example, need more lawyers to do kinds of transactions you used to not need them. You used to be able to do on trust. And so the share of lawyers in our economy has doubled over recent decades. Just another example of the kind of costs we're all paying for higher levels of inequality.
Now, you're calling for academics to totally rethink their view of the economy, to make it more interdisciplinary. What do you have in mind?
Well, for years, economists had this very narrow view of how human beings acted, that they acted just on their self-interest, and if you give them a little bit more incentive, they were going to work harder and get rich. And there is some truth to that, but it ignores a much larger system that's going on and that structures our economy. And so economists, they had that really narrow worldview. What they were missing was that the economy is part of and structured in society, and that it needs lots of different things in order to work properly. So one of the things it needs is a functioning government that's providing fair and adequate rules and making the investments in the public goods like education and infrastructure that I was talking about earlier. You also need to have a trusting economy. If you think of many countries that are really not able to grow, there's such high levels of distrust, the economy doesn't work right. And so you need those kind of things that are just outside of these really little narrow way that the economists were thinking about the world. And they are coming to understand this, and there's been really great criticism even from sort of some of the most prominent economists. Tons of Nobel Prize winners have written scathing indictments similar to what I'm arguing. And so I think much of the academic discipline has coming around to this view that they've been overly narrow in how they think about the economy.
Why did the scholars and the professional economists get it so wrong about trickle-down theory?
There were a bunch of reasons, I think. One, and the biggest, is that I just sort of talked about, is that they had this narrow view that made them unable to see the larger forces that were crumbling around them. So they could do these little, and they would create these mathematical models that would say, yes, if you do X or Y, you're going to get this little increase, and ignore that the foundations of the economy were crumbling because inequality had reached such record levels. The other thing is that there was, of course, a lot of political pressure and forces and advantage to be championing this kind of argument, to be saying that, helping the rich makes everyone better. And so there was a lot of incentive for people to think a certain way. But I think the facts have become so clear that, the facts ultimately are trumping all these other interests and ideologies. We suffered through a Great Recession, and that really forced people's eyes wide open to say, wow, these old theories that we were relying on were totally wrong.
David Madland, director of the American Worker Project and managing director of the economic policy team at American Progress. His new book, Hollowed Out, Why the Economy Doesn't Work Without a Strong Middle Class. David, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
My pleasure.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, Congress may be out of session. That doesn't mean they are not on the job. At least some of them even willing to get up early and get on the phone and talk to us, like Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, joining us on our news line. Representing the people of Minnesota, working for all the people of the United States, and author of a new book called The Senator Next Door, a memoir from the Heartland. Welcome, Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thanks so much, Bill. It is great to be on. I thought you had me on because you were going to come out for the opening of the Minnesota State Fair tomorrow and stand out at the gate with me at 6 a.m.
Oh, my God. Well, the Iowa State Fair is famous for all the unusual foods it offers, I guess. Yeah. What is the Minnesota State Fair famous for?
Oh, the same. Chocolate-covered bacon on a stick. Peach glazed pork cheeks. Yes, these are all things I have eaten there. And, of course, the butter carving contest with Princess K and the Milky Way and the woman standing in a revolving refrigerator carving their butter buffs one day at a time.
I forgot about the butter carving contest. Oh, yeah. I heard about it.
Well, you're missing it. I just thought maybe that's why you were calling me. You were going to announce your appearance.
Wait a minute. When does it start?
Tomorrow morning. I'm always out there at the fair because I greet all the fairgoers at about 5:45 in the morning when they arrive. It's 12 days. Anyway, another day you can come.
Well, it just happened, Senator, that I am coming out on
You're coming out for the Democratic National Committee. You can go. You can visit my booth right by the Bob Snake Zoo.
There it is. Yeah. I am coming out Thursday for the DNC
Okay,
meeting.
If you have time, you should stop by because it is the scene.
Okay, I'll tell you what.
It really is the biggest state fair in the country, and it's in the metro area, except for Texas, but we don't count them.
No.
Because they are open for an entire month.
Oh, that doesn't count. No,
okay.
no.
All right.
So if I call your office today, I can find out about it, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
It'll be fine.
Good. Well, congratulations.
We'll find a media escort for you.
A media?
All right.
Oh, okay. Congratulations on the book. And
Thank you.
You tell the story. Can't wait to read it. Just got a hold of the copy. But, it wasn't... It was an unusual journey for you, I guess, right? Getting all the way to the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, and I wrote this book myself, which is somewhat unique in political books, and it's called The Senator Next Door, because I think more people have to start remembering where they came from and representing the people when they get to Washington in a way where you can actually work with people and not be so negative. And my story I told because I would like to see, I'll call them a little more normal backgrounds for people to run. I mean, I went from being a car hop at the E&W root beer stand where they made me wear a tight T-shirt that said "Take home a jug of fun," to being a pie cutter at the then Top and Fresh Pie Shop, to the U.S. Senate. There were a few things in between, but so it's that story, and it's a story of redemption of my dad struggling with alcoholism his whole life, and having gotten divorced from my mom, and then now at 87, he's finally recovered and still climbing mountains and married for the third time and happily.
And he was in the newspaper business, right?
Yeah, in fact, in 1960, he called the election for John F. Kennedy because Minnesota, Illinois, and California were still out, and he knew the northern Minnesota blue-collar Catholic stronghold where his dad had been a miner his entire life. He predicted they would go for Kennedy. They told the national AP desk that, and the guy had two words for them. You guys in Minnesota, I have two words. Be right. And they called it, and 13 minutes later, James Reston of the New York Times reported Nixon conceded. So it's a very exciting story in the book. And making history there for sure. Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing that's always impressed me is the line of real giants in the U.S. Senate from Minnesota, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
Gene McCarthy and Hubert Humphrey and Paul Wellstone, Walter Mondale, whom you worked with, and now you and Al Franken continuing that tradition. What is it about Minnesota?
Well, I think, first of all, we have one of the highest voter turnouts in the country every single year. So a lot of people get engaged and interested. They tend to watch debates. So I think they tend to, and remember, we've also had many Republicans, Rudy Boswich, David Dernberger, who actually continues to work a lot on the health care issue,
right,
and other things in a really positive way. And I just think that they have the citizens demand a lot. They have high expectations for those who go to represent them. And I think you see that in some of the people that have come up through the past. I start and end the book with Hubert Humphrey just because he was this happy warrior, as they called him, someone who, in the worst of times, just always looked for the positive and really had an incredible list of accomplishments, things he'd gotten done. I actually asked for his desk in the Senate. I tell the story in the book. Oh. And a few days later, I'm so excited, and I open that desk, you know, where they carve their name.
Oh, yeah.
And I look, and it says Gordon Humphrey, a little-known Republican senator from New Hampshire. I'm like,
no, is that right? Yeah, right.
True. And by then, I'd already learned to pick my battles, so I just waited a few years, whatever, like Gordon Humphrey, and I sat next to Jean Chahine when she got elected. Mm-hmm. I told her the story. She says, how do you know it's his? I said, well, he carves his name in. So I opened it to show her because they all look the same.
Yeah.
And there it is. They replaced the desk that year, and I have Hubert Humphrey's desk.
Do you now have Hubert Humphrey's desk? Wow.
Yeah.
Have you carved your name in a desk?
I asked that once when we were doing a votorama on health care. I was a little punchy, and I went into the cloakroom. I go, I'd like to have a nice, we'd like to start carving our names in. They said, you can't do it till the day you leave.
Oh.
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
Yeah,
so you have to wait.
Well, I didn't know that was a tradition. I have to ask you if you. I should know this, but I don't. So I'm going to ask you. Have you yet taken a position on the Iran nuclear deal? That's the biggest issue in front of the Senate.
Oh, yeah. I came out rather early a few weeks ago in favor of the agreement. As I said that day, I think it's the best available option to put the brakes on Iran getting a nuclear weapon. This is one of our biggest foreign policy priorities, and having talked to all those nuclear experts, having read the letter from the 29 of them, including all these Nobel laureates, I really concluded that you have, number one, a really intrusive inspection regime on the three facilities. Number two, the nuclear option, as the president has made very clear, remains on the table, so that if Iran cheats, it's not like we're backing off or we're bringing home ships from the region. And then number 3, having met with all those ambassadors from the countries that are part of the agreement, I think that is really a major problem to splinter our international coalition. It would hurt us if we do have to use the military option, and it certainly hurts us in the eyes of the world. You've got, China and Russia are probably going to start doing business with them anyway, and then Iran would have a nuclear weapon. So those are all reasons. I do have deep respect for people on the other side. I think it was a tough decision, but that's how I came down.
Right. And do you think the president will succeed in getting that either approval or sustaining a veto?
I think the president will succeed in getting this approved. I don't know exactly where the numbers will be about if it has to get to the point of sustaining a veto. Maybe not. A lot of Debbie Stabenow just came out yesterday in favor of the agreement.
And Patty Murray yesterday too.
And you have conservative, more conservative, moderate Democrats like Joe Donnelly, Claire McCaskill, John Tester coming out in favor of the agreement. So people really spent the time and looked at this, and I think it would have been easier, honestly, to oppose it because you can always find things wrong, all right?
Yeah.
And this thing is not perfect. But I think people really looked at it and came to the conclusion that it was the best thing to do.
Now, you were also, Senator Amy Klobuchar, our guest. Her new book is The Senator Next Door. It's in your local bookstore, of course, and you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of the good sites. You were one of the first senators to endorse Hillary Clinton for president in 2016. What are you going to do if Joe Biden jumps in?
Well, I like everyone else, I'm fond of the vice president. He's been a very good vice president, and I just look at it this way. Hillary Clinton is someone who I think would be an outstanding president. And when others have joined, including my good friend Bernie Sanders, we came in together. You're not going to see me ever saying a bad word about him. I just think, you just have more candidates in the race, and that's how it goes. Certainly there's a difference between our primaries so far. Our candidates are respectful of each other. They're not giving out each other's cell phone numbers as retribution, for instance. They're not disrespecting each other or other people, or sending out tweets telling newscasters that they're bimbos. They're not doing these things. I think they're running an above-board primary. Obviously, they have heartfelt views. They're all going to be in Minnesota at the end of the week here for the Democratic National Convention, along with you. But for the committee, Democratic National Committee, and so I think that I see these two primaries as very different.
Boy, they sure are. The contrast is just, it is incredible. Well, it will be even more exciting. It's exciting already. It'll be even more exciting, I guess, if Joe Biden jumps in. And it's going to be very exciting being in Minneapolis, I have to tell you. Even more exciting than I thought, now that I know the other options that are there, Senator. So,
well, you also can go to the Mall of America, the biggest mall in the country, for my book signing.
Yeah.
There's many options for you.
Little did I know. I think, I better call Carol and tell her I'm going to be a week in Minneapolis now.
You are not coming back.
Not just 2 days. All right,
beautiful
Senator.
weather.
Oh,
all right. Well, very
great
good.
to visit
check
with
out
you.
the book. I think you guys will like it, and it just has a little more humor than some of these books, and some pretty honest stories.
I would expect the humor and the honesty from you for sure, Senator Amy Klobuchar. The book is The Senator Next Door. There'll be also a link up on our website to the book. And Senator, thank you so much for your time this morning. Congratulations again. I'll see you in a couple of days.